I can still hear the rain that morning. It wasn't pouring, just steady. Soft enough to sound gentle from inside the chapel, but cold enough that every drop felt like it carried a memory. I remember gripping the edge of the pew so tightly my knuckles turned white. My husband's photo stood at the front of the room, surrounded by wilting lilies, a smile forever frozen in a frame he'd picked out for our wedding 7 years ago. The funeral director gave me that polite, professional look of pity they must practice in mirrors. "Ready when you are," he whispered. I wasn't. I don't think anyone ever is. But I nodded anyway because someone had to keep things moving. My family was supposed to help with that. Mom, my sisters, even my uncle who lived just 2 towns over. They'd all promised to come early, help me set up, maybe even bring food for after the service. Instead, I sat there alone, surrounded by empty chairs that should have been filled by people who once called him one of the good ones. My daughter, Ava, sat beside me clutching the tiny white rose we'd picked together that morning. Her hair was still damp from the rain. "Mom," she whispered, "are they coming?" I forced a smile that felt like glass cracking. "They'll be here soon, sweetheart." But even as I said it, I could see the truth reflected in the chapel's glass doors. Just my reflection staring back. When the service began, the pastor stumbled over my husband's middle name. Nobody corrected him. Nobody except me even noticed. I kept glancing at the door, waiting for the sound of my family's hurried footsteps, the whispered apologies about traffic or bad directions. But the doors never opened. I sat through every hymn, every story, every kind word from his friends at work, pretending I wasn't keeping score of every empty seat that belonged to someone who'd sworn they cared. By the time the last song ended, the lilies had started to brown at the edges. Ava pressed her rose against the coffin before we left, and I realized she was the only family member who had actually shown up for him. For us. Outside, the wind had shifted colder, slicing through my coat as I carried the leftover programs to the car. A stranger, one of my husband's old co-workers, helped load the folding chairs into his trunk, telling me to call if I needed anything. Funny how the people who owe you nothing are the ones who show up when it counts. That night, after putting Ava to bed, I sat on the living room floor, surrounded by sympathy cards and silence. I scrolled through my messages, half expecting to see apologies or explanations. Nothing. Not from Mom, not from my sisters, not even from my Aunt Carol, who usually acted as the family peacekeeper. Then, just as I set my phone down, a notification blinked across the screen. It was from my mother. I almost didn't open it. "Sorry we couldn't make it. Things got complicated. We'll come by next week to catch up. By the way, could you send $1,850 for Savannah's legal fees?" Family emergency. I stared at the message until the words blurred. My husband's funeral had ended less than 12 hours ago, and my family's first communication wasn't condolences. It was an invoice. I didn't respond right away. I just sat there, staring at the little typing bubble that appeared, disappeared, then came back again. "You know we wouldn't ask if it weren't serious," she wrote. "Savannah's lawyer needs the payment by Friday." Friday. The same day I was supposed to meet with the bank about transferring my husband's savings to cover the mortgage. The same account my mother didn't know about, or maybe she did. She always found out somehow. She'd raised me on guilt and secrets, and even after all these years, both still worked better than chains. I closed my eyes and remembered the last conversation I'd had with her before the funeral. "You don't have to worry about anything," she'd said over the phone, her voice syrupy sweet. "We're family. We'll take care of everything." Apparently, everything didn't include showing up. I didn't sleep that night. I watched the clock tick past 2 a.m., then 3 a.m., trying to make sense of how people who shared my blood could feel so foreign. Around 4, I got up, made coffee, and sat by the window watching rain smear the world into watercolor. I thought about my husband's laugh, how he'd always said I apologized too much. "You can't keep fixing people who break you, Maya," he used to say. "Sometimes you've got to let them live with the mess they make." But I never listened. The next morning, I opened my phone again. More messages. This time from my sister, Lacey. "Mom said you're handling the payment for Savannah's case. I'll text you the account number." No greeting, no question about the funeral. Just an assumption that I'd keep playing the role I always did. The responsible one. The one who handled things. Ava wandered into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes. "Did Grandma call?" she asked, hope flickering behind her sleepy voice. I shook my head. "Not yet, baby," she sighed. "Maybe tomorrow." After dropping her at school, I sat in the car for a long time. The world outside moved on like nothing had happened. People getting coffee, kids laughing, buses roaring by. My husband's name was still etched on the funeral program, lying in the passenger seat. Already starting to fade where rain had touched it. That's when the thought hit me. Not loud or dramatic, just quiet and certain. This was the last time I'd let them decide what I owed. When I got home, I opened my laptop and searched my emails. I still had the receipts, years of them. Transfers for Mom's rent when she was between jobs. Deposits for Lacey's car payment. Emergency cash for Savannah's salon, for her rent, for her phone bill. Over $20,000 in 3 years, and not a single repayment. I scrolled through them, each transaction a breadcrumb trail of guilt I'd mistaken for love. The doorbell rang. I flinched, half expecting it to be one of them. But when I opened the door, it was Mrs. Wilson from next door holding a casserole dish wrapped in foil. "I didn't see much family around yesterday," she said softly. "Thought you and the little one might need something warm." I almost cried right there on the porch. "Thank you," I whispered. She smiled. "You don't have to thank me." That's what neighbors are for. After she left, I set the casserole on the counter and stared at the steam rising from the foil. I realized I couldn't remember the last time anyone had done something kind for me without expecting something in return. My phone buzzed again. This time, a new message from Mom. "You've had a rough week, I get it. But don't make this about money. Family sticks together. It's just $1,850. Just." The word hit harder than I expected. I picked up my phone, opened the message, and typed a single reply. "No." The typing bubble appeared almost immediately. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," I typed back. "No." There was a long pause. Then, "You'll regret this, Maya." Family always remembers who turns their back. I set the phone down and exhaled. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was drowning. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was freedom. The silence lasted a whole day before the storm hit. It started with a knock on my door, just past noon. I was still in pajamas, halfway through paying bills when I opened it to find Aunt Carol standing there, raincoat dripping, expression tight. "They're saying you've lost your mind," she said without preamble. "Your mother's telling everyone you're unstable since the funeral." I blinked at her. "Unstable? Because I said no?" Carol sighed, stepping inside. "You know how she spins things." "She says you've been under a lot of stress, that you might be acting out of grief. I just wanted to hear your side before she drags you through the mud." "My side," I said, gesturing toward the kitchen table. "It's right there." The spreadsheets were open on my laptop, color-coded by date. Money transfers, receipts, messages, all of it laid bare like evidence in a trial. Carol's eyes widened as she scrolled. 23,000? She whispered. "Good Lord, Maya." "Every dollar they said they'd pay back," I said quietly. "Every promise they forgot as soon as it cleared." She sat down slowly, pressing her palms together. Your father warned me before he left. He said Eleanor doesn't see people as people, just resources. I didn't want to believe him. But this—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "You did the right thing saying no. I wanted to believe that, but it didn't feel right. Saying no to family was like breaking some unwritten law, especially when that family had raised you to think loyalty meant self-sacrifice." "Mom texted again this morning," I said. "She said I'm destroying the family." "Good," Carol said sharply. "Maybe it needs destroying." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The kitchen clock ticked softly, marking the space where grief and guilt used to live. Then Carol pushed a check across the table. "For Ava's future," she said, when I started to protest. "Not charity." "Just consider it my way of balancing the scales." I stared at the check, at her signature looping across the bottom. "You don't owe me anything." "Neither did you," she replied, standing. "But you gave anyway. Time you learned what it feels like on the other side." After she left, I sat there for a long time, the check untouched. Outside, the rain had stopped, but thunder still grumbled somewhere far off, like the world hadn't quite decided if it was done being angry. That night, my phone lit up again. Group chat. Family matters. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Mom, we're giving you one more chance to fix this." Savannah: "You embarrassed us in front of everyone. The lawyer said, if we don't pay, I could lose the salon." Lacey: "Just handle it like you always do." "You're the numbers person." I stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the keyboard. Ava's soft breathing drifted from her bedroom. I thought about the way she'd looked at me at the funeral, trusting me to make things okay even when nothing was. Then I typed, "If you contact me again about money, I'll block every one of you." And I did. For the first time in my adult life, my family couldn't reach me. No buzzing notifications, no late-night guilt trips, just quiet. It was almost unnerving, that kind of peace, like learning how to breathe after years of shallow gasps. 3 days later, the first letter arrived. Not a text this time, but an actual letter in my mailbox, written in Mom's looping cursive. "Maya, you've forced my hand. Since you've decided to withdraw support from this family, we'll be consulting an attorney regarding the money you owe us. You've benefited from our generosity for years, and it's time to make things right. I expect you to resolve this before things get ugly." "Mom," I laughed out loud, the sound strange in the quiet kitchen. Benefited from their generosity? The absurdity would have been funny if it hadn't been so familiar. This was her oldest trick, reversing the truth until it bent into something that suited her. Still, something in that letter rattled me. A lawsuit? Over money I gave them? The idea was ridiculous, but I'd seen what she could twist when she wanted to. She'd been rewriting history my entire life. The next morning, I went to the post office and filed a change of address for official mail, just in case. Then I called Aunt Carol again. "She's threatening legal action," I said. Carol didn't sound surprised. "Let her try. She doesn't have a case, but she'll drag your name through every church bulletin and Facebook group she can find. Be ready for that." I was. Or at least I thought I was. What I wasn't ready for was the social media war that followed. Within days, Savannah had posted a photo of the three of them at brunch: Mom, Lacey, and her. Glasses raised, smiles practiced. The caption read, "Some people choose money over family. We choose love." The comments poured in. "So proud of you, ladies." "You're better off without the drama." "Blood doesn't make family." Each one landed like a slap, even though I knew none of those people knew the truth. Still, it hurt watching strangers applaud the very people who'd skipped my husband's funeral. At work, I started noticing the whispers. Small-town gossip travels faster than light. My co-workers didn't say much directly, but I caught snippets. Heard her family's suing her. Something about an inheritance. Such a shame. She always seemed so put together. The only one who asked me outright was James, my shift supervisor. He leaned against my desk one afternoon and said, "You okay?" "You've been quieter than usual." I hesitated, then said, "My family's trying to sue me." He blinked. "For what?" "For not giving them money I never owed." He let out a low whistle. "Damn. Remind me not to attend your family reunions." The joke broke through my tension, and I laughed. Really laughed. For the first time in weeks. It felt foreign, like using a muscle I'd forgotten I had. That night, when I picked Ava up from school, she handed me a drawing from art class. 2 stick figures holding hands under a bright yellow sun. "That's us," she said proudly. "I told Mrs. Langston we're a team." I smiled, blinking back tears. "We sure are." But the peace didn't last long. A week later, a manila envelope arrived from a law office downtown. Inside was a formal notice. Eleanor Allen versus Maya Allen. The accusation? Unlawful retention of family funds and emotional distress. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. I called the number listed on the letter and ended up speaking to a weary-sounding paralegal. When I explained my side, she sighed. "Between you and me, Miss Allen, this kind of thing happens more than you'd think. We'll probably recommend mediation. Do you have records of the transfers?" "Every single one," I said. "Then you'll be fine." Fine. That word again. Easy for strangers to say. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I lay awake listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the house settling. Every sound felt amplified. I kept picturing my mother sitting in some lawyer's office, telling her story with those crocodile tears she'd perfected. At 2 a.m., I got up and opened my laptop. If she wanted records, I'd give her records. I organized every transaction, every message, every unanswered repayment promise into a single, airtight file. I titled it, "The Cost of Family." When I finally crawled back into bed, Ava stirred beside me. "Bad dream, Mom," she mumbled. "No, baby," I whispered, brushing her hair from her face, "just waking up." The courthouse smelled like disinfectant and regret. I sat on the hard wooden bench outside courtroom 2B, clutching the folder I'd labeled "The Cost of Family." Ava's old backpack sat beside me, filled with snacks and coloring books for later, because babysitters were expensive, and I refused to lean on the people who put me here in the first place. Aunt Carol was the only one who came with me. She sat quietly, flipping through a magazine she clearly wasn't reading. "You don't have to do this alone," she said softly. "I'm not," I said, glancing toward the door where Ava's laughter drifted from the waiting area. "Not anymore." When my name was called, my heart thudded so loud it drowned everything else. Inside, Mom sat at the plaintiff's table flanked by Savannah and Lacey. They looked polished, coordinated, like they were auditioning for the part of grieving relatives in a courtroom drama. Mom's eyes met mine for half a second before she turned away, lips pursed. The judge, a middle-aged man with silver hair and a no-nonsense expression, adjusted his glasses. "We're here for case number 2024 CV3128, Eleanor Allen versus Maya Allen. Allegations of financial withholding and emotional harm." When he asked Mom to speak first, she launched into her performance effortlessly. "Your Honor, my daughter has benefited from this family's support for years," she began, her voice trembling at all the right moments. "We've lent her money, helped with her child, and now she refuses to return what's rightfully ours. We're a family built on love, not greed." Lacey nodded dramatically, dabbing at her eyes. Savannah crossed her arms, jaw tight, in rehearsed indignation. When it was my turn, I stood slowly, my folder trembling in my hands. "Your Honor, I have documentation of every transaction between myself and the plaintiffs," I said, placing the folder on the table. "Every dollar they're claiming I owe was money I gave. voluntarily and without repayment. I have bank records, messages, even timestamps. The judge leafed through the pages, his brow furrowing deeper with every turn. "Mrs. Allen," he said finally, looking at my mother, "can you provide proof that these were loans rather than gifts?" Mom's mouth opened, then closed. "It was family," she said, flustered now. "We don't make each other sign contracts." The judge leaned back in his chair. "Then I'm afraid this case doesn't meet the criteria for recovery. The court cannot enforce repayment of voluntary gifts." Silence. For the first time in my life, my mother didn't have words. The gavel came down with a sharp crack, final and clean. Case dismissed. I didn't move. I just stood there, numb, while Savannah hissed something to Lacey and stormed out. Mom gathered her purse with jerky movements, glaring at me like I'd broken some sacred covenant. "You've humiliated this family," she spat. "You'll regret it." "Maybe," I said, "but I won't regret standing up for myself." Outside, the sun hit me square in the face. I hadn't realized how heavy the air inside that courtroom had been until I could breathe again. Carol handed me a coffee she'd picked up from the vending machine. "You handled that like a pro," she said. "I don't feel like one," I admitted. "I just feel tired." "That's what peace feels like at first," she said with a smile. That night, Ava and I ordered pizza and watched an old movie she loved. Halfway through, she curled against me, her small head resting on my shoulder. "Mom," she whispered, "why don't Grandma and Aunt Savannah like us anymore?" My throat tightened. I could have lied, told her they were just busy or confused. But she deserved better than that. "Sometimes people don't know how to love the right way," I said finally. "They think love means control. But we're learning how to do it differently." She seemed to think about that for a moment before nodding. "I like our way better." After she fell asleep, I sat at the kitchen table again. My phone buzzed nonstop. Texts from unknown numbers, half from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, all parroting the same message. "How could you do this to your own mother? Family is everything. You'll regret this someday." I deleted them one by one. Then, finally, I typed a single post on my own social media page. For years, I believed that family meant sacrifice without limits. Today I learned that real love doesn't demand payment. I'm done confusing guilt with loyalty. I didn't tag anyone. I didn't need to. By morning, the post had 100 likes, mostly from coworkers, neighbors, and friends who'd seen enough to understand the truth. A few even commented things like, "Proud of you," and "Boundaries are healthy." For the first time in months, my phone was filled with kindness instead of manipulation. A few days later, Carol stopped by again, this time with paint swatches. "You need a change," she declared. "Fresh color, fresh start." We spent that Saturday transforming the living room walls from beige to soft yellow. Ava called it sunshine paint, and by the time we finished, the whole house felt brighter, lighter. Every brushstroke felt like reclaiming space they'd occupied for too long. Space in my head, in my heart, in my home. When the last coat dried, I stood back and realized something. The silence that used to feel lonely now felt peaceful. That night, while Ava worked on her homework at the kitchen table, I got a knock on the door. Through the peephole, I saw James, my coworker, holding a stack of mail. "These were in the office box," he said, handing them over. "Figured you'd want them before the weekend." I thanked him, and he lingered a moment, glancing at the newly painted walls. "You've been through hell, huh?" I nodded. "Something like that." He smiled faintly. "You seem lighter." "I think I am," I said. "For the first time in years." He hesitated, then asked, "You and Ava want to join a few of us for lunch tomorrow?" "Nothing fancy. Just burgers at the park." For a moment, old habits whispered, "You don't have time. You don't belong." But then I looked at Ava, humming to herself as she colored. She deserved to see her mother surrounded by people who treated her with respect, not obligation. "We'd love to," I said. Sunday was warm, the kind of warmth that felt earned. At the park, Ava ran across the grass with a laugh that sounded like sunlight. I watched her chase Bubbles with the other kids, her joy unburdened, untouched by all the chaos we'd left behind. When James handed me a paper cup of lemonade, I realized this was what family could look like. People who showed up because they wanted to, not because they wanted something. Later that night, after Ava had gone to bed, I opened one last letter that had come in the mail pile. It was from Mom. No return address, just my name written in that familiar looping script. I almost threw it away, but something made me open it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No apology, no explanation. Just 5 words. "You'll always be one of us." I stared at it for a long time before folding it neatly and placing it in the same folder as all the receipts and screenshots. A reminder, not of connection, but of closure. Then I turned off my phone, locked the front door, and for the first time since my husband's funeral, I slept without nightmares. Morning sunlight spilled through the kitchen window, hitting the new yellow walls and making the whole room glow. It had been 2 months since the court dismissed my mother's lawsuit, and every day since had felt a little lighter, like dust slowly clearing from the air after a storm. The calls had stopped. The texts had stopped. Even the whispers in town had faded into background noise. For the first time in forever, silence didn't sound like punishment. It sounded like peace. Ava was at the table, her legs swinging beneath the chair, concentrating on her math homework. "Mom," she said suddenly, "can we go to the farmer's market this weekend?" Mrs. Wilson said she's selling blueberry pies again. I smiled. "We can. Maybe we'll get 2 this time." She grinned. "You mean one for us and one for her?" "Exactly." It was funny how the smallest routines, the ones that used to feel mundane, now felt sacred. Grocery lists, packed lunches, evening walks around the block. They were all reminders that life could be steady, that joy didn't have to be dramatic to be real. At work, things were changing too. The promotion I'd been quietly passed over for twice finally came through. "You've earned it," James said when he handed me the letter. "You've been carrying this place for years." When I got home that evening, I placed the envelope on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a sunflower. Ava noticed it while helping me set the table. "What's that?" she asked. "Something that means things are getting better," I said. That night, after dinner, I sat at the kitchen table and opened a new spreadsheet. But this one wasn't for bills or debts or family drama. It was for savings, Ava's college fund. I started small, transferring $50 from my paycheck, then another 20. It wasn't much, but it was ours, and it was the beginning of a future I could actually see. A few days later, Mrs. Wilson knocked on the door carrying a basket of tulips and a flyer for the community center. "They're starting a support group for single parents," she said. "Thought you might want to check it out. They meet Thursday nights, and they have free childcare." I almost declined out of habit, years of saying no to anything that wasn't survival. But something in her smile made me pause. "Maybe I'll stop by," I said. That Thursday, I walked into the center expecting awkward introductions and fluorescent lights. But what I found was warmth, coffee cups, laughter, people who weren't perfect but who showed up anyway. There were stories of loss, of starting over, of learning to build lives from the ground up. When it was my turn to speak, I hesitated, then said, "I used to think family was something you had to earn. Now I think it's something you build." Heads nodded around the room. A woman beside me reached over and squeezed my hand. "You're home now," she said, quietly. The following weekend, Ava and I went to the park with James and a few others from work. She played basketball with the older kids, her giggles echoing across the court. James sat beside me on the bench, a soda can sweating between his hands. "She's doing great," he said. "She's stronger than I ever was at her age," I replied. He smiled. "Maybe that's because she's got you showing her how." I didn't know what to say to that. Compliments still made me uneasy, but this one didn't sting. It settled quietly, like something true. As the weeks rolled on, small things kept changing. My mother's name stopped showing up in my thoughts every morning. The guilt faded like an old bruise. The house, once cluttered with reminders of obligation, became filled with color. Ava's drawings taped to walls, Carol's framed photographs, a vase of tulips that never seemed to wilt. One night, while cleaning the bookshelf James had built, I found an old family photo tucked between paperbacks. It was from my wedding day. My husband's smile was bright, his arm around me, and behind us, my family stood stiff and posed, their expressions brittle even then. For a moment, I considered throwing it out, but then I placed it in a drawer instead. A reminder of what I'd survived, not what I'd lost. Later that month, a letter arrived. This one wasn't from my mother or my sisters. It was from my father's brother, Uncle Robert. The return address was smudged, but inside was a postcard from Oregon with a single line in shaky handwriting, "Proud of you for breaking the cycle." I stared at it for a long time, my throat tight. I'd spent years wondering why Dad left, assuming he'd abandoned us. But maybe he'd just escaped the same cage I'd finally broken free from. When Ava got home from school that day, I showed her the postcard. "Who's it from?" she asked. "Someone who understands," I said. That night, we made dinner together, spaghetti and garlic bread, our comfort meal. Halfway through, she looked up from her plate. "You're smiling more," she said matter-of-factly. I laughed. "You keep track of that?" "Yeah," she said. "It used to be only on weekends. Now it's every day." Something in my chest cracked open at that. I reached across the table and took her hand. "You're my reason, kiddo." "You always were." The following week, our small circle grew. Aunt Carol started coming over on Fridays, bringing cookies and stories. Mrs. Wilson joined us for coffee on Sundays after church, even though she always claimed she wasn't religious. James showed up with books for Ava, and a crooked grin that made my stomach flutter in a way I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the family I was born into. It was the one I was building, one where no one kept score or demanded payment for love. On a quiet Saturday morning, Ava and I planted a rosebush in the backyard, one for my husband. As we patted the soil around the roots, she asked, "Will it grow fast?" "Not fast," I said. "But it'll grow strong." She nodded seriously. "Like us." When the sun started setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching her chase the neighbor's cat across the grass. The air smelled like rain, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel haunted by anything. The past was still there, but it no longer owned me. Before heading inside, I took one last look at the rosebush swaying in the wind. It wasn't much yet, just a few green shoots pushing through the soil, but it was alive. And that was enough. Inside, Ava had already set the table for dinner. 2 plates, 2 glasses of water, and a candle she'd lit herself. "For Daddy," she said when I raised an eyebrow. I smiled. He'd like that. As we ate, she asked, "Do you think Grandma will ever say sorry?" I thought about it, then shook my head. Maybe not. But we don't need her to anymore. Ava nodded slowly. Good. Because we're fine. She was right. We were. By the time spring rolled around, our home felt completely new. The yellow paint had faded slightly in the sunlight, but somehow that made it better, softer, lived in, real. The bookshelf James built now overflowed with Ava's favorite stories, framed photos, and the little ceramic owl she'd painted at school. Every corner of the house told a story, not of loss, but of rebuilding. Life had found its rhythm again. Work during the week, game nights with Carol and Mrs. Wilson on Fridays, quiet mornings where I drank coffee on the porch while Ava slept in. There was no drama, no late-night guilt calls, no emotional manipulation wrapped in family slogans. Just peace, steady and unfamiliar. One afternoon in early April, I got a letter. Not from my mother this time, but from her attorney. I froze when I saw the return address, bracing myself for another ambush, but inside was only a single page. Per the client's request, this notice serves as formal withdrawal of any pending or potential actions. Mrs. Eleanor Allen has chosen not to pursue the matter further. This concludes all claims. No apology, no explanation, just an end. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, the letter between my fingers. Then I folded it carefully and placed it at the very back of the cost of family folder. Not as proof, but as punctuation. The last page of a long, painful chapter. When Ava came home that day, I told her we were celebrating. For what? She asked. For new beginnings, I said, pulling her into a hug. For everything we've survived. We baked brownies that evening, the kind she loved with extra chocolate chips. She insisted on licking the spoon, smearing batter across her cheek, and I didn't even care about the mess. When the timer dinged, we sat on the floor with our plates, watching the rain streak down the window. "Mom," she said after a while, "do you miss them?" I thought about the noise, the guilt, the constant anxiety of trying to be good enough. Sometimes, I said honestly, but missing people doesn't mean you want them back. She nodded, thoughtful. I think Daddy would be proud of you. That one hit home. I reached over, brushing chocolate from her chin. I hope so, baby. That weekend we visited the park where I used to take my husband before Ava was born. The air smelled like lilacs. We brought a picnic blanket, sandwiches, and a new kite with bright rainbow stripes. Ava ran across the field, her laughter soaring with the kite above her. Watching her, I realized that grief doesn't disappear. It just changes shape. It softens, making room for joy to exist alongside it. James showed up a little later, carrying a thermos of lemonade. "Didn't think you'd mind some company," he said. "Not at all," I smiled. "Your family now, remember?" He looked surprised, then nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I guess I am." The three of us spent the rest of the afternoon under the wide blue sky, the kind of day that feels ordinary until you realize how extraordinary it is just to be free. That night, after Ava went to bed, I sat at my desk and opened the journal Carol had given me for Christmas. On the first page, in her neat handwriting, she'd written, "For the next chapter of your story, write it exactly how you want." I turned to a blank page and began to write. "Once upon a time," I wrote, "there was a woman who thought love meant always saying yes, who believed that family was something she owed, not something she deserved. But one day, she realized that love built on guilt isn't love, it's debt, and she decided to stop paying. The words flowed easier after that. Every line was a release, every sentence a reminder that the story wasn't about what I'd lost. It was about what I'd reclaimed." When I closed the journal, I caught my reflection in the darkened window. For years, I'd looked at that reflection and seen only exhaustion. Now I saw something different. Strength. Quiet. Grounded strength. The next morning, a package arrived on our doorstep. No name, no return address. Inside was a framed photo, me and Ava at the park, the kite midair behind us. Someone must have taken it without us noticing. At the bottom of the frame, a small engraving read, "You're home now." I placed it on the bookshelf beside the ceramic owl. A week later, the school held a family day event. Parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, everyone invited. For a moment, I hesitated. Those words used to feel like landmines. But Ava looked up at me, eyes bright. "You'll come, right?" "Of course," I said. "We'll bring our whole crew." And we did. Carol, Mrs. Wilson, and James all showed up, cheering louder than anyone when Ava's class performed their song. Other parents smiled, probably assuming they were my siblings or close friends. Maybe they were both. After the performance, Ava ran into my arms, her face glowing. "Did we do good?" she asked. "You did amazing," I said, kissing her forehead. As we walked home that afternoon, she slipped her small hand into mine. "Mom," she said, "are we happy now?" I looked at her, at the sunlight tangled in her hair, at the peace I'd fought so hard to earn. "Yeah, sweetheart," I said softly. "We really are." That night, after she went to bed, I stepped outside into the cool evening air. The stars were sharp and clear, the kind of night that makes the world feel wide open. I thought of everything we'd been through, the funerals, the betrayals, the letters, the courtroom, and felt something close to gratitude, not for the pain, but for the clarity it brought. Sometimes losing your family is how you finally find your life. I whispered a quiet thank you to the universe, to my husband, to whatever force had given me the courage to stop running in circles. Then I went back inside, turned off the lights, and stood in the doorway of Ava's room for a moment. She was asleep, her arm wrapped around her stuffed rabbit, the faintest smile on her lips. "Love doesn't hurt anymore," I whispered. When I finally climbed into bed, I glanced at the folder still tucked in my desk drawer, the one labeled "The Cost of Family." I thought about throwing it away, but decided against it. It wasn't a burden anymore. It was a reminder of how far we'd come. Before closing my eyes, I made a silent promise to never let guilt sound like love again. And with that, I let sleep take me. For the first time in years, my dreams were calm. No voices, no accusations, just sunlight, laughter, and the sound of Ava's kite snapping in the wind. Our new life, untethered and free. And that wraps up today's story, a painful, powerful reminder that sometimes the hardest no you'll ever say is the one that saves your life. If this story touched something in you, take a second to breathe, then hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear that saying no doesn't make you heartless. It makes you whole. And if you haven't already, subscribe for more stories that hit home. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.